The sound of Commander Zara Vex's voice could strip paint from a starship hull at 50 meters. Lieutenant Marcus Webb discovered this fact approximately 30 seconds after stepping onto the training grounds of Forward Base Meridian, when her latest verbal assault on a squad of fumbling recruits reached decibel levels that probably violated several interspecies noise ordinances. Pathetic. The word echoed across the compound with the force of a plasma cannon discharge. My grandmother could execute that maneuver better, and she's been dead for 60 standard years. Marcus paused in his approach to the training area, genuinely curious about whether Krillian grandmothers possessed some kind of posthumous combat capabilities he hadn't read about in the cultural briefings. The squad of mixed human and alien recruits cowered appropriately as their commander continued her systematic demolition of their self-esteem. You, Commander Vex pointed at a particularly unfortunate human private, explain to me why you thought throwing your weapon at the enemy simulator was an acceptable tactical choice. I ran out of ammunition, ma'am, the private stammered. You ran out of ammunition because you were firing on full automatic like some kind of trigger-happy civilian. Conservation of resources is a fundamental principle of military survival. Commander Vex's pointed ears, distinctive markers of her Krillian heritage, were practically vibrating with indignation. If you can't hit your target with controlled bursts, you have no business holding a plasma rifle. Marcus had to admit that her criticism was technically accurate, though her delivery method might have been more effective if it didn't require the medical staff to keep trauma counselors on standby. He'd heard stories about Commander Vex during his briefing for this joint human-Krillian training assignment. How she'd single-handedly held off an entire enemy battalion during the Proxima conflict, how her tactical innovations had been adopted by military academies across 3 star systems, and how her training programs had the highest success rate and lowest casualty rate in active duty. What the briefings hadn't mentioned was that she was also apparently capable of making seasoned combat veterans question their life choices with nothing more than precisely applied verbal intimidation. And you, Commander Vex wheeled around to address a Krillian recruit who had been trying to blend into the background. Your form during the urban combat simulation was so sloppy that enemy snipers would be sending you thank you cards for making their job easier. The recruit, who looked like he could bench press a hover tank, actually whimpered. Marcus began to understand why his assignment to this base had come with hazard pay. Now we're going to run the simulation again, Commander Vex announced to the assembled squad, and this time, I want to see something that resembles actual military competence instead of whatever amateur performance art you were attempting before. Marcus checked his chronometer and realized he was officially late for his check-in with the base commander. Military protocol demanded that he report immediately upon arrival, but watching Commander Vex systematically dismantle his new colleague's confidence was proving oddly hypnotic. Lieutenant Webb. The voice that could strip paint was suddenly directed at him with the precision of a targeting laser. I assume you have some explanation for loitering around my training ground like a tourist at a weapons demonstration. Marcus snapped to attention automatically, years of military training overriding his fascination with the commander's teaching methods. Ma'am. Lieutenant Marcus Webb reporting for duty assignment to Forward Base Meridian. Commander Vex strode across the training ground with the fluid grace of a predator approaching prey. Up close, Marcus could see that the stories about her legendary combat skills weren't exaggerated. She moved with the kind of casual lethality that came from years of turning violence into an art form. Her uniform was perfectly pressed despite the fact that she'd apparently been training recruits in hand-to-hand combat, and her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation knot that somehow managed to look both practical and elegant. Your personnel file indicates specialized training in xenological combat tactics and cross-species military coordination, she said, her voice dropping from parade ground bellow to merely intimidating. It does not indicate any experience with actual combat beyond simulation exercises. That's correct, ma'am, Marcus replied, wondering if this was going to be another exercise in creative humiliation. Excellent. Fresh meat for my training program. Commander Vex's smile was the kind that made small prey animals reconsider their life choices. You can join this squad for their remedial combat simulation. Let's see if human tactical theory holds up better than Krillian overconfidence. Marcus moved to join the squad of already traumatized recruits, mentally preparing himself for whatever creative forms of military education Commander Vex had in store. The simulation began with the usual urban warfare scenario: multiple objectives, limited ammunition, enemy forces with superior positioning. Standard military problem solving. What wasn't standard was the way Commander Vex positioned herself to observe every move, every decision, every tactical choice with the focused intensity of a scientist studying particularly interesting bacteria. Marcus could practically feel her analytical gaze tracking his movement through the simulation environment. The exercise went reasonably well until Marcus attempted a flanking maneuver that would have been textbook perfect if he hadn't misjudged the timing of an enemy patrol route. His cover was blown, his position compromised, and his simulated death was both immediate and embarrassing. Simulation terminated, the computer announced helpfully. Mission failure. All objectives incomplete. Marcus emerged from the simulation chamber expecting the kind of verbal flaying that had reduced the previous squad to quivering puddles of military inadequacy. Instead, he found Commander Vex standing with her arms crossed, her expression thoughtful rather than immediately destructive. The morning sun streaming through the training facility's transparent aluminum windows caught the angular planes of her face, highlighting the sharp intelligence in her dark eyes and the determined set of her jaw. For a moment, she looked less like an instrument of military destruction and more like. "You look stunning today, Commander," Marcus said, the words escaping before his brain could engage proper military protocol. The effect was immediate and profound. Commander Vex, who had been preparing to deliver what was undoubtedly a surgical analysis of his tactical failures, stopped mid-breath. Her pointed ears flushed a deep purple that Marcus's xenobiology training recognized as the Krillian equivalent of intense emotional response. Her eyes widened in what appeared to be genuine shock, and for the first time since Marcus had arrived on base, the legendary Commander Vex seemed completely at a loss for words. The training ground fell silent. The squad of recruits who had been bracing for another round of verbal demolition now stared in fascination at their apparently broken commander. Even the automated training system seemed to pause, as if the base's AI couldn't process the unprecedented sight of Commander Vex rendered speechless. Commander Vex began, then stopped. She opened her mouth again, closed it and stared at Marcus as if he'd just announced his intention to challenge the base's quantum computer to a poetry contest. Marcus realized that he might have made a significant tactical error. Complimenting a superior officer on their appearance was probably covered somewhere in the manual under things that will get you court-martialed, and doing it to the most feared military trainer in the sector was likely to result in creative forms of punishment that would become cautionary tales for future generations. "Commander, I apologize if that was inappropriate," he said quickly. "I just meant." "Dismissed." Commander Vex barked suddenly, her voice cracking slightly on the word. "All of you. Training resumes at 0800 tomorrow. Move." The recruits scattered with the speed of small creatures fleeing a natural disaster, leaving Marcus alone with a commander who was still staring at him as if he'd grown additional heads during the conversation. "Commander Vex, I really am sorry if I overstepped. Report to my office at 1900 hours, Lieutenant," she said, her voice carefully controlled but lacking its usual intimidating edge. "We need to discuss your integration into the training program." With that, she turned and strode away, leaving Marcus standing alone in the training facility wondering exactly what he'd just triggered and whether his military career was about to end in spectacular fashion. As he watched her retreat, Marcus couldn't help but notice that her stride was less confident than before, and her usual perfect posture seemed slightly off balance. For the first time since arriving at Forward Base Meridian, Commander Zara Vex looked almost human. Or at least, as human as a legendary Krillian warrior could manage after having her entire worldview disrupted by an unexpected compliment from a nervous human lieutenant who had apparently forgotten every lesson about military protocol in the space of a single morning. Commander Zara Vex had faced enemy fire, hostile alien species, and budget meetings with military accountants without breaking stride. But Lieutenant Marcus Webb's completely unexpected compliment had her questioning everything she thought she knew about human psychological warfare. She sat in her office reviewing training reports, but the words might as well have been written in ancient Fularian script for all the sense they were making. Every few minutes, she caught herself touching her pointed ears, which had finally returned to their normal color after an embarrassing hour of deep purple flushing that she hoped none of the recruits had noticed. "You look stunning today, Commander." The words replayed in her mind with the persistence of a malfunctioning audio loop. In 30 years of military service, no one had ever described her appearance as stunning. Intimidating, yes. Terrifying, frequently. Professionally competent, on good days. But stunning? Zara pulled up Lieutenant Webb's personnel file on her desktop display, studying his records for any indication of the tactical thinking behind his comment. Specialized training in xenological combat tactics suggested he understood alien psychology well enough to know that appearance-based compliments were either mating overtures or elaborate insults in most non-human cultures. His academic records indicated above-average intelligence, which meant he'd either made a calculated move or a spectacular error in judgment. The door chime interrupted her analysis. "Enter," she called, expecting one of her staff sergeants with routine reports. Instead, Major Harrison, the base's human executive officer, strode in with the expression of someone who'd been fielding interesting communications from the training grounds. "Commander Vex," he said, settling into the chair across from her desk without invitation, "I've received some unusual reports about this morning's training session." Zara felt her ears threaten to flush again and forcibly controlled the response. "Sir. Apparently, one of our new human arrivals caused what witnesses describe as a system malfunction in your usual training routine." Major Harrison's tone was carefully neutral, but Zara caught the hint of amusement he was trying to suppress. "Care to explain why Lieutenant Webb is scheduled for a private meeting with you tonight?" "The lieutenant requires additional orientation regarding appropriate military protocol," Zara said, proud of how steady her voice sounded. "According to Sergeant Morrison, the lieutenant made you speechless with a single sentence. In 15 years of knowing you, Commander, I've never seen anything make you speechless." Major Harrison leaned forward with obvious curiosity. "What exactly did he say?" Zara stared at her desktop display, weighing her options. She could lie, claim it was classified, or deflect with technical military jargon. Instead, she found herself admitting, "He told me I looked stunning." Major Harrison blinked. Then blinked again. "I'm sorry, did you say he complimented your appearance?" "That appears to be what happened, yes." "And your response was to freeze up completely and then schedule a private meeting?" Zara realized how that might sound to someone unfamiliar with the existential crisis that a simple compliment had triggered. "Major, in Krillian culture, appearance-based comments are either challenges to combat or mating advances. Neither interpretation seemed appropriate for a training ground interaction with a subordinate." "But he's human," Major Harrison pointed out with the patience of someone explaining basic physics. "Human compliments don't necessarily carry the same implications as Krillian ones." Then what did he mean? The question escaped before Zara could stop it, revealing more vulnerability than she'd intended. Major Harrison's expression shifted from amusement to something approaching sympathy. "Commander, has anyone ever complimented your appearance without wanting something in return?" Zara considered the question seriously. "Not in my memory, no." "Then maybe," Major Harrison said gently, "Lieutenant Webb was simply acknowledging something he genuinely noticed. Humans do that sometimes, they comment on beauty because they appreciate it, not because they want to possess or challenge it." After Major Harrison left, Zara found herself standing in front of the mirror in her private washroom, studying her reflection with uncharacteristic attention. She saw what she'd always seen, sharp features designed for intimidation, dark eyes that could reduce recruits to tears, pointed ears that marked her as non-human to species who needed such distinctions. Professional competence made manifest in physical form. But what had Lieutenant Webb seen when he'd looked at her in that moment of sunlight and tactical analysis? The afternoon training session went poorly. Zara caught herself hesitating before issuing commands, second-guessing orders that should have been automatic after decades of military leadership. Worse, she kept scanning the training ground for Lieutenant Webb, wondering if he was watching her performance and finding it lacking compared to whatever had prompted his morning observation. When she snapped at a recruit for a minor form error, behavior that was perfectly normal for her usual training style, she noticed several personnel exchanging glances that suggested her reputation for consistency was under review. "Commander." Sergeant Morrison approached cautiously after she dismissed the afternoon squad. "Is everything functioning normally with your tactical assessment protocols?" Zara almost laughed at the diplomatic phrasing. "Why do you ask, Sergeant?" "Well, ma'am, you've been different since this morning. Less focused, maybe. The recruits are starting to wonder if they should be concerned about some kind of command structure instability." "The command structure is perfectly stable, Sergeant," Zara replied, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed it herself. "Of course, ma'am. It's just that you've never been affected by recruit comments before, and Lieutenant Webb's observation seemed to cause some kind of processing delay in your usual response patterns." Zara stared at her sergeant, realizing that her entire command staff had noticed her reaction to a simple compliment. "Sergeant Morrison, in your experience with human personnel, what does it mean when they comment favorably on someone's physical appearance?" Sergeant Morrison looked surprised by the question but considered it seriously. "Depends on the context, Commander. Sometimes it's attraction, sometimes it's just appreciation of aesthetic qualities. Humans seem to find beauty in a lot of places and don't always need a reason to mention it. Aesthetic appreciation without ulterior motive? Yes, ma'am. They're strange that way." At 1900 hours precisely, Lieutenant Webb appeared at her office door with the punctuality of someone who understood that being late to a meeting with Commander Vex was potentially life-threatening. Zara had spent the intervening hours preparing what she intended to be a comprehensive briefing on appropriate military protocol and cross-species cultural sensitivity. Instead, the moment he entered, she found herself studying his face for any indication of the tactical thinking behind his morning comment. "Lieutenant Webb," she said, gesturing for him to take the chair across from her desk. "We need to discuss what happened during today's training session." "Yes, ma'am. I apologize for any disruption my comment may have caused." His voice was steady, but she caught subtle signs of nervousness in his posture. "Explain your reasoning," Zara said, falling back on standard interrogation techniques. "What was the tactical purpose behind your statement?" Lieutenant Webb looked genuinely confused. "Tactical purpose, Commander? Your comment about my appearance. What did you hope to accomplish?" He paused, apparently searching for words. "There wasn't a tactical purpose, ma'am. I just thought you looked beautiful in that moment, and I said so without thinking." Zara felt that same disorienting sensation she'd experienced on the training ground. "Without thinking?" "Yes, ma'am. Sometimes humans speak impulsively when they're struck by something that seems worth acknowledging." "So you weren't attempting psychological manipulation or testing my response to unconventional stimuli?" Lieutenant Webb's expression shifted to what Zara was beginning to recognize as genuine concern. "Commander, I would never attempt to manipulate a superior officer. I spoke without considering protocol because your expression when you were analyzing the training data was." He trailed off, seeming to realize he was walking into potentially dangerous territory. "Was what, Lieutenant?" "Brilliant," he said simply. "You looked absolutely brilliant and completely focused, and the way the light caught your features just made the whole scene seem almost artistic, I suppose. It struck me as beautiful, and I said so before I remembered where I was." Zara stared at him, processing the possibility that his compliment had been exactly what it appeared to be, genuine appreciation without hidden agenda or cultural manipulation. The concept was so foreign to her experience that she found herself struggling to formulate an appropriate response. "Lieutenant," she said finally, "are you aware that appearance-based comments can be interpreted as challenges or mating advances in many non-human cultures?" "Yes, ma'am. But I wasn't thinking about cultural implications in that moment. I was just responding honestly to what I saw." And what did you see? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Lieutenant Webb was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing his words carefully. I saw someone completely in their element, Commander. Someone who loves what they do and excels at it in a way that's genuinely impressive. The competence was beautiful, but so was the passion for getting it right. Zara felt something shift in her chest, an unfamiliar warmth that had nothing to do with military efficiency or tactical superiority. For the first time in her adult life, someone had looked at her and seen something beyond her function as a weapon of military policy. That's... She paused, surprised by how difficult it was to find appropriate words. That's an unusual perspective, Lieutenant. I suppose it is, ma'am. I apologize if it was inappropriate. Don't apologize, Zara said, the words coming out more forcefully than she'd intended. I'm trying to understand something I've never encountered before. They sat in silence for several moments, the weight of unexpected honesty settling between them. Finally, Zara spoke again. Lieutenant Webb, would you be willing to help me understand how human appreciation of aesthetics functions in military contexts? For cultural education purposes, of course. Of course, Commander. I'd be happy to help. As Lieutenant Webb left her office, Zara realized that her legendary composure had been permanently altered by a single moment of genuine human appreciation. The question was whether this change would make her a better commander or simply a more confused one. 3 weeks into what had become unofficial, cultural education sessions, Commander Zara Vex discovered that human appreciation for beauty extended far beyond military efficiency and tactical competence. Lieutenant Marcus Webb had introduced her to concepts like aesthetic harmony, artistic expression, and the radical idea that finding something beautiful required no justification beyond the simple pleasure of recognition. Explain to me again why humans create visual art that serves no tactical purpose, Zara said, studying the holographic display of famous earth paintings that Marcus had compiled for their evening discussions. Because beauty has value in itself, Marcus replied, adjusting the projection to show a landscape painting from the 22nd century. Not everything needs to serve a military or survival function to be worthwhile. They were in the base's observation lounge, a space designed for off-duty personnel to relax while enjoying the view of Tau Ceti's binary sunset. Zara had never used it before. Marcus had suggested it as a venue for their cultural exchange sessions, claiming that understanding human aesthetics required exposure to actual beauty rather than just theoretical discussions. But resources spent on creating art could be allocated to more practical purposes, Zara pointed out, though her argument lacked the conviction it would have carried a month ago. Could be, Marcus agreed. But humans discovered long ago that efficiency isn't everything. Sometimes the impractical things are what make life worth living efficiently for. Zara considered this as she watched the twin suns cast shifting patterns of light across the lounge's transparent aluminum windows. In Krillian culture, we appreciate the elegance of a perfectly executed tactical maneuver or the beauty of efficient resource allocation. But we don't generally acknowledge aesthetic value independent of function. What about the way you move during combat demonstrations? Marcus asked, his tone carefully casual. I've watched you run training scenarios, and there's something almost dance-like about your movement patterns. That suggests aesthetic awareness even in purely functional activities. Zara felt her ears warm at the observation. Combat efficiency often resembles artistic expression coincidentally. The movements are optimized for effectiveness, not beauty. But they're beautiful anyway, Marcus said simply. And I think you know that, even if your culture doesn't encourage acknowledging it. Their conversations had evolved from formal cultural briefings to something approaching friendship, though Zara wasn't entirely sure what to call the relationship they developed. Marcus treated her with military respect during official duties, but during their evening sessions, he spoke to her as an equal rather than a superior officer. The novelty was both disturbing and oddly addictive. Lieutenant Webb, she said, using his rank out of habit, may I ask you something personal? Of course, Commander. And you can call me Marcus during these sessions if you want. We're off duty. Marcus, then. The name felt strange in her mouth, too informal for military protocol but somehow appropriate for the conversation. When you complimented my appearance that first day, were you attracted to me? Marcus paused in his manipulation of the art display, clearly weighing his response carefully. That's a complicated question. How so? Because attraction can mean different things, he said, turning to face her directly. I found you beautiful in that moment, yes. But I was also impressed by your competence, intimidated by your reputation, and fascinated by the intensity of your focus. All of those things combined into what I guess you could call appreciation rather than simple attraction. Appreciation, Zara repeated, testing the word. As opposed to desire for possession or challenge for dominance? Exactly. I saw something worth acknowledging and acknowledged it. No agenda beyond that. Zara moved to stand beside him at the observation windows, watching the light patterns shift across the base's exterior. I've been thinking about what you said regarding the beauty of functional excellence. Do you really see aesthetic value in military competence? I see aesthetic value in mastery, Marcus corrected gently. Whether it's military tactics, artistic creation, or scientific discovery. When someone excels at something they're passionate about, there's a kind of beauty in watching them work. And you saw that in me? I see it every day, Marcus said, his voice carrying a sincerity that made Zara's chest tight with unfamiliar emotion. You don't just command troops, Zara. You inspire them to be better than they thought they could be. That's not just military skill, that's artistry. Zara realized he'd used her given name without her permission, and that she didn't mind. No one has ever described my work as artistry before. Maybe that's because no one ever looked at it from the right angle. They stood in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades that had no tactical significance but somehow seemed important anyway. Zara found herself wondering when she'd stopped seeing beauty in things that weren't immediately useful, and whether it was possible to reclaim that perspective without compromising her effectiveness as a commander. Marcus, she said finally, I want to try something. What kind of something? I want to change one aspect of my appearance, something small that serves no functional purpose but might be aesthetically pleasing. Marcus turned to study her face with the same focused attention she'd seen him apply to tactical problems. What did you have in mind? I don't know. That's why I'm asking for your input. Zara felt heat rise in her cheeks at the admission. I've never made appearance choices based on beauty rather than efficiency. Well, Marcus said thoughtfully, you could let your hair down instead of keeping it in regulation knots all the time. Or maybe add some color to your uniform accessories. Krillian regulations allow for personal touches, right? They do, but I've never exercised that option. Why not? Zara considered the question seriously. Because calling attention to non-functional aspects of my appearance seemed frivolous. A waste of mental resources that could be better applied to mission objectives. But what if enhancing your appearance actually improved your mission effectiveness? Marcus suggested. Confidence affects performance, and feeling good about how you look contributes to confidence. You think I lack confidence? I think you've never allowed yourself to feel beautiful, which is different from confidence. Marcus's expression was gentle but serious. You're incredibly competent, Zara, but competence and self-appreciation aren't the same thing. The next morning, Zara appeared at the training grounds with her hair arranged in a more relaxed style that still met military regulations while allowing natural waves to frame her face. The change was subtle, but the effect on base personnel was immediate and obvious. Conversations paused as she passed, and she caught several appreciative glances that had nothing to do with her intimidation factor. Commander Vex, Sergeant Morrison said during the morning briefing, if I may say so, you look different today. Different how, Sergeant? More approachable, ma'am. Less like you're about to order executions for minor infractions. Zara felt a smile threaten to break through her professional composure. I see. And how is this affecting training efficiency? Honestly? The recruits seem more focused on impressing you than on avoiding your wrath. It's an interesting tactical shift. During the afternoon combat simulation, Zara noticed that her usual commanding presence felt enhanced rather than diminished by the small change in her appearance. The recruits responded to her orders with the same speed and precision as always, but their body language suggested respect and eagerness rather than mere fear. When Marcus joined the evening simulation review, his immediate smile when he saw her confirmed that the aesthetic experiment had been successful. "You look wonderful," he said simply, and Zara realized that the compliment no longer triggered panic or confusion. Instead, it felt like recognition of something she'd finally allowed herself to embrace. "Thank you," she replied, surprising herself with how natural the response felt. "I wanted to see if feeling beautiful would affect my command performance. And it appears that self-appreciation enhances rather than compromises leadership effectiveness," Zara said with satisfaction. "An interesting discovery." "I'm glad you're discovering that," Marcus said, his tone carrying warmth that Zara was beginning to recognize as genuine affection rather than mere courtesy. "Marcus," she said as they reviewed the day's training data, "I want you to know that our conversations have changed how I see myself and my role here." "In what way?" "I've spent my entire career defining myself solely through military function. You've shown me that acknowledging beauty, in myself, in others, in the work we do, doesn't diminish effectiveness. It enhances it." Marcus looked pleased but not surprised. "Beauty and strength aren't opposites, Zara. They complement each other." "I'm beginning to understand that," she said, then hesitated before adding, "I'm also beginning to understand why your compliment affected me so strongly that first day." "Oh." It was the first time anyone had seen me as more than just a weapon or a position of authority. "You saw me as a person worth appreciating." Zara felt her ears flush slightly, but this time the response felt pleasant rather than embarrassing. "That was profound." "You are worth appreciating," Marcus said seriously. "In every possible way." As they concluded their review session, Zara realized that Marcus's simple compliment had accomplished something that years of military advancement and tactical recognition never had. It had helped her remember that being fully human, or fully Krillian, meant embracing all aspects of herself, not just the ones that served immediate tactical purposes. "Marcus," she said as they prepared to leave the observation lounge, "tomorrow I want to try something even more adventurous with my appearance." "What did you have in mind?" "I want to wear a touch of color. Something that serves no purpose except beauty." Marcus's smile was radiant. "I think that's a wonderful idea. And," Zara added with growing confidence, "I want you to help me choose it." The attack came at dawn, 3 days after Commander Zara Vex had begun wearing a small sapphire blue accent pin that perfectly complemented her eyes and served absolutely no tactical purpose whatsoever. The hostile forces hit forward base Meridian with the kind of precision that suggested extensive reconnaissance and careful planning, which made their timing particularly unfortunate for them. They had chosen to attack when Zara was feeling more confident and complete than she had in her entire military career. "All stations, code red." The base's alarm system pierced the morning quiet as enemy ships descended from Tau Ceti's upper atmosphere. "This is not a drill. All personnel to battle stations." Marcus found Zara in the command center, coordinating defensive positions with the fluid grace he'd come to associate with her moments of peak performance. But there was something different about her demeanor. The same lethal competence he'd always admired, enhanced by the self-assurance that came from someone who had learned to see herself as more than just a military instrument. "Lieutenant Webb," she called as he entered the tactical planning area, "I need your xenological combat expertise. Enemy formations suggest Vorthack assault patterns, but with modifications I don't recognize." Marcus studied the holographic display of approaching enemy vessels, noting the unusual wing configurations and approach vectors. "They've adapted standard Vorthack tactics for multi-species coordination," he said, highlighting specific patterns in the formation. "Those modified ships suggest they're working with at least 2 other hostile species." "Recommendations?" Zara asked, her voice carrying the focused intensity he found so compelling. Standard anti-vortex defenses won't be sufficient. We need adaptive countermeasures that can respond to multiple tactical philosophies simultaneously. Marcus pulled up comparative analysis data on his tactical pad. But I have some ideas about exploiting the coordination weaknesses inherent in multi-species alliances. Show me, Zara said, and Marcus realized that her request carried a note of genuine partnership rather than mere superior to subordinate information gathering. Working together, they developed a defense strategy that combined Zara's legendary tactical brilliance with Marcus's specialized knowledge of interspecies combat psychology. Their plan relied on creating confusion in enemy coordination by presenting targets that would trigger different response patterns from each species in the attacking force. This could work, Zara said with satisfaction, but it requires perfect timing and absolute trust between our command elements. Do we have that? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. We do now, Zara replied, her confidence evident in both her voice and her posture. Deploy the plan. The battle that followed became legendary not just for its tactical innovation, but for the demonstration of how effective leadership could inspire extraordinary performance from ordinary personnel. Zara commanded with the strategic brilliance that had made her famous, but her orders carried a new quality, respect for her troops as complete individuals rather than mere tactical assets. Alpha Squad, I need you to hold position 7 for exactly 4 minutes, she announced over the comm system. I know it seems impossible, but I've seen what you're capable of when you trust yourselves. Make me proud. Marcus watched the squad's response patterns and saw something remarkable. Instead of the fear-driven compliance that characterized most military units under extreme pressure, Zara's troops were responding with determined enthusiasm. They weren't just following orders, they were inspired to exceed expectations. Beta Team, your precision targeting in the last engagement was absolutely beautiful, Zara continued, coordinating multiple defensive positions simultaneously. Now I need that same excellence applied to coordinates I'm transmitting. Show these invaders what superior marksmanship looks like. Commander, Marcus said during a brief lull in the combat, your leadership style has changed. How so? Zara asked, recalibrating defensive shields while monitoring enemy movement patterns. You're not just commanding troops anymore. You're inspiring them to be their best selves. Marcus highlighted successful defensive positions on his tactical display. Look at these performance metrics, our personnel are operating at efficiency levels 30% above standard combat ratings. Zara studied the data with obvious surprise. I hadn't realized. I suppose I've been treating them the way you treated me. What do you mean? Seeing them as complete people worthy of appreciation rather than just military functions. Zara's expression carried a mix of wonder and satisfaction. Acknowledging their competence as something beautiful rather than just useful. The enemy's final assault wave tested every aspect of their defensive strategy, but the coordinated response from base personnel was unlike anything Marcus had witnessed in his military career. Troops who had been terrorized by Zara's traditional training methods were now performing with the confidence of individuals who knew their commander saw them as valuable beyond their immediate tactical utility. All stations, Zara announced as the last enemy vessel retreated from weapons range, outstanding performance. Every single one of you exceeded expectations and contributed to our victory. I am genuinely proud to serve alongside personnel of your caliber. The cheers that erupted from the comm channels carried a quality Marcus had never heard in military communications, not just relief at survival, but joy at recognition from a commander they'd learned to respect rather than merely fear. In the post-battle briefing, Major Harrison reviewed the tactical analysis with obvious amazement. Commander Vex, I've never seen coordination like this from a base defense. How did you achieve these performance levels? I stopped treating beauty and strength as mutually exclusive concepts, Zara replied, her sapphire accent pin catching the briefing room's lights. When you appreciate people for their complete selves rather than just their functional utility, they respond by becoming more than you imagined they could be. Major Harrison looked between Zara and Marcus with obvious curiosity. And this tactical innovation came from your cultural exchange sessions? Among other insights, Zara said with a slight smile. Lieutenant Webb helped me understand that acknowledging beauty, in people, in performance, in possibilities, doesn't weaken military effectiveness. It enhances it. After the formal debriefing, Zara and Marcus found themselves alone in the observation lounge where their evening conversations had begun weeks earlier. The binary sunset painted the sky in shades that Marcus had taught her to appreciate for their intrinsic beauty rather than their tactical significance. "Marcus," Zara said as they watched the light patterns shift across the base's exterior, "I want you to know that your compliment that first day didn't just change how I see myself. It changed how I lead." "How so?" "I learned that true strength comes from embracing all aspects of yourself and others, not from suppressing everything that isn't immediately functional." She touched the sapphire pin she'd chosen to wear as her first purely aesthetic accessory. "When I stopped being afraid of being seen as beautiful, I became more effective as a commander. And when you started seeing your troops as complete people rather than just military assets, they became more effective soldiers," Marcus added with understanding. "Exactly. Beauty and strength complement each other in ways I never understood before." Zara turned to face him directly, her expression serious but warm. "You gave me permission to be fully myself instead of just a military function." "You were always fully yourself," Marcus corrected gently. "I just helped you remember that being beautiful doesn't diminish being formidable. And you helped me understand that the most powerful leadership tool isn't fear or intimidation, it's genuine appreciation for the people you're privileged to command." As they watched the stars emerge in Tau Ceti's darkening sky, Marcus reflected on how a simple, impulsive compliment had triggered changes that rippled far beyond their personal interactions. Zara's transformation from feared drill sergeant to inspirational leader had created a new model for military effectiveness based on mutual respect rather than authoritarian control. "Zara," he said, using her given name with the familiarity that had grown between them, "what you've accomplished here will change how people think about military leadership." "What we've accomplished," she corrected, her hand finding his with natural ease. "Your perspective on beauty and appreciation gave me the foundation to build something new." "So what happens now?" Zara's smile was radiant in the starlight, transforming her sharp features with warmth that had nothing to do with intimidation and everything to do with genuine joy. "Now we keep learning from each other. We keep finding beauty in strength and strength in beauty. And we keep proving that the best leadership comes from seeing people as they truly are rather than as functions they're supposed to serve." "I love the sound of that," Marcus said, understanding that they were no longer discussing military theory but something far more personal and lasting. "Marcus," Zara said, her voice carrying the same focused intensity he'd first admired during that training exercise weeks ago, "you look absolutely wonderful in this starlight." "Thank you," he replied, smiling at how natural the exchange had become. "So do you, Commander. So do you." As they stood together in the observation lounge, watching the lights of their base reflect against the cosmic backdrop, both understood that their partnership had evolved into something that transcended military hierarchy and species boundaries. Marcus's compliment had cracked open Zara's professional armor, but what had emerged wasn't weakness. It was a kind of strength that came from embracing all aspects of herself and inspiring others to do the same. "You know," Zara said as they prepared to return to their quarters, "I think I'm finally beginning to understand what you meant about beauty having value in itself." "What's that?" "This moment. This conversation. The way you look when you're thinking about something important." She gestured toward the starlit vista beyond the windows. "None of it serves any tactical purpose, but all of it makes life worth living well." Marcus squeezed her hand gently, marveling at how a moment of impulsive honesty had led to discoveries about leadership, beauty, and the transformative power of genuine appreciation. "I couldn't agree more."